Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and today I have a bit of a different video to share with you. Today I'm going to be showing 4 ways to use one stamp set, starting with a very simple way of using it, which needs only limited supplies, and then moving on to more kind of intermediate ways of using the stamp set. And the stamp set I'm going to be using is the Chubby Chums stamp set from Paper Smooches, and Paper Smooches are very kindly sponsoring this video. So if you would like to win your own copy of the Chubby Chums stamp set, be sure to stick around and find out all the details of the giveaway. For the first card I'm going to show, this is a very basic way of using the stamp set. All you need is your stamps, ink, and some kind of colouring medium. I'm using my MISTI to do the stamping, but you really don't need to do this. You can just use an acrylic block if that's what you have. And I'm going to stamp the owl and the woohoo sentiment, which goes with the owl, onto my white card base. And I'm using MFT Black Licorice Hybrid ink for my stamping because I'm going to use alcohol markers, and that ink is suitable for using with alcohol markers. So you do need to make sure that whatever ink you choose is suitable for the colouring medium you are going to use. Having done the stamping, we're going to do the colouring, and I'm using Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers for my colouring. These are alcohol markers, as I said. And I'm going to start by colouring the top portion of the owl's body. And I'm not going for realistic colours here, so I'm going with yellow for the top portion of the body. And I started by laying in my shadow areas, and as I most often do, I'm having my shadows towards the left hand side as if my light source is coming from the right hand side or the top right hand side. And I do like to work from darkest to lightest, so I lay my shadows in first, working with my darkest colour, then I extend it out with my mid-tone, and then I lay in my brightest colour, which in this case is Canary, which is a nice bright yellow. Once I've finished the yellow area, I'm going to do the next layer down of feathers, and I have made my owl really bright and colourful, so I'm going with orange for the next layer down. And the top layer of feathers does overlap that next layer, so there will be a cast shadow below the kind of ruffly part of the feathers. And these areas are much smaller, so you wouldn't necessarily need as many shades for doing this. But I do like to stick to 3 shades, generally speaking. I did decide the orange wasn't bright enough, so I went over it with bright orange to make it even brighter. And then I did need to go back in and add the shadows because the glazing with the bright colour did knock the shadows back a bit. For the next level of feathers, I decided to go with pink, and again I'm going quite bright with my pinks, and I'm laying those shadows in to the left hand side and also where the pink layer is beneath the orange layer, because again there would be that cast shadow. For the bottom portion of the owl's body, I'm going to go with a nice bright green, and that area is actually going to be mostly in shadows, so I will keep it nice and dark there. And I use kind of emerald and citrusy green colours for that. I do want to tie the green in more, so I'm going to use that as well on the wings of the owl. Again, putting the shadow areas in first, and the shadows are going to be close to the body as well because the wings are kind of tucked behind the body. I did decide to use the green for the owl's eyebrows as well, and also for the outer portion of the owl's ears. And then I used the pink for the top portions of the ears. I went back to orange for the owl's beak, and then I used the yellows for the feet of the owl. I do like to add some shape and dimension to the eyes, especially on these Chubby Chums images because they have very kind of bulbous looking eyes. So I do use a very light blue shade there and blend it out with my blender pen, and that just helps the eyes to stand out more. And then as a final touch, I'm going to use some greys to add a cast shadow beneath the owl so that it does look like it is standing or sitting rather than just floating in midair. Although as an owl, I suppose it wouldn't matter too much if it was floating in midair. And once I've added that shadow, that completes my first card, which, as I said, is really simple. It's literally just stamp it and colour it. So definitely suitable for a beginner. Moving on to the second card, we're going to add a few extra details to this. So I'm starting by stamping my chosen images and sentiments onto a card base. So I have the chick, the cat and the dog and their associated sentiments, and I like the way it kind of reads across, so it's "Hey chickie, you're perfect, let's play." I think that worked nicely. I've then cut 3 pieces of pattern paper because we're going to be doing some paper piecing. I of course chose a yellow one for the chick, a kind of creamy one that has stripes for the tabby cat, and a brown one for the dog. And I'm then going to fussy cut each of those out so that I just have the shape of each of the animals on that pattern paper. I'll just show fussy cutting the chick. I'm then going to use some inks to add detail to my fussy cut images. You can use whatever colouring medium you want for this, but I chose inks and I'm using just a very small blending brush. I used Limoncello ink from Catherine Pooler to add some shading around the edge of the chick, and then I'm using Tutti Frutti, which is also from Catherine Pooler, to add colour to the chick's feet and also its beak, and just give them a bit of orange. And I did use some very basic masks just to help with getting those smaller areas. For the cat, I'm using Beige ink from Simon Says Stamp for adding my shading. And again, as with the colouring on the previous card, I'm putting my shading to that left-hand side as if the light source is coming from the top right. I also used Paper Bag Ink from Altenew to add colour to the stripes on the cat, as well as its eyebrows, paws and ears. And again, I'm using just some very, very basic masking to make sure I don't get the ink where I don't want it. Then finally for the dog, I'm adding detail with Twilight Ink from Catherine Pooler, which is grey, and we'll just add shape and dimension to that dog. I stamped out the images again onto some white card, and I'm just adding colour to the eyes and also the dog's tongue and the cat's nose. And I will fussy cut those out because I'm going to piece them onto the images so that they have nice bright eyes and nice pink nose and tongue, rather than at the moment the dog has brown eyes, for example. So by adding these white ones, it makes the eyes look a bit more realistic as they can look on these cartoony animals. And then just use some liquid glue to piece those into place. And then I'm going to add some shading to the card base. Again, I want my images to be grounded so they're not just floating in space, and I'm using the Twilight ink and a blending brush for this, and just slipping the images into place to check that I have enough shadow there. Then I'll bring back my Tombow Monomalte liquid glue and just put that all over the images that I stamped on the card base so that I can slip my paper pieced images into position. And this really doesn't take very long at all. You wouldn't necessarily have to stamp the images on the card base, but I just found that it helped me with lining them up. And once they're all in place, that completes my second card. So this was a little bit more involved than card 1, but still quite a simple card. Moving on to card number 3, we're going to be creating a scene, a very simple scene. So I've stamped the cow onto a snippet of white card and masked it off. And then I'm going to ink blend a background. I'm using Dusk ink from Altenew for my sky. And I have a cloud stencil, although you could easily fussy cut out a cloud border to use as a stencil if you prefer. I've also just very roughly cut a hill using my scissors and some scrap paper. And I'm going to use the negative portion of that mask then to ink blend the ground using green apple ink from Hero Arts. And I just kept this really very simple. I didn't actually add grounding to the cow. If I'd thought about it, I would have done. But that would be really easy to do. You just need to add more of that green ink under where the cow is sitting, and that will add a bit of shading to it. So I then removed the mask from the cow once I'd finished all the ink blending, and I'm going to use my Spectral Noir markers again to colour the cow in. Just very quick and simple colouring. And I used some creamy colours for the body of the cow and pink for its nose, and I'll again use that blue for the eyes. I then, before die cutting out the panel, I'm going to stamp over it again with Versafine Onyx black ink, which is a richer black, so it just makes the lines bolder. I then used a die to die cut out that panel, and then I have a piece of blue pattern paper which I'm adhering to my white card base. I'll trim away the excess, and work out where I want my focal panel positioned. Before adhering that into place, I did white heat emboss the coordinating sentiment, which says Smooches, onto a strip of black card, and I'm going to pop that up on the focal panel with foam tape. And then I'm going to pop the whole focal panel on some more foam tape over that blue background. And that completes card number 3, which, as I said, is a bit more involved, again, design, but it's still quite simple, and you wouldn't have to do the die cutting if you don't have a die cutting machine. You could just cut down your panel with your paper trimmer or a craft knife. The 4th and final design is a more involved scene, and this is no line colouring, or it's meant to be. My stamps were a little bit dirty, so the lines didn't fade back as much as I wanted, but I used barely beige ink because that's good for no line colouring. And then before I start on colouring, I'm using a light brown to draw in the branch that I want the owl sitting on, and also the fence that the cat is sitting on. I did show the scrap paper that I had sketched out my idea onto, and I'm using that as a guide for working out where I want all my drawn elements to be. And this just helped me because I'm not very confident with drawing. Planning out in advance was really helpful to me. Having drawn those elements in, I'm going to start on my colouring, and I started with the owl, and I did decide to go with more natural colours this time, so I'm using greys for the owl. And as before, I have all my caps on screen so you can see what colours I am using. So whilst I'm doing that colouring, because you already know, I already talked you through how to colour the owl, so I will take this opportunity to explain about the giveaway. So as I said, Paper Smooches has very kindly offered to give one lucky winner a copy of the Chubby Chums stamp set. I have set up a raffle copter for entering, so if you're watching on YouTube, you can look in the description box and there will be a link there to the raffle copter. If you're on my blog, then there's a link in the blog post. All you need to do to enter is follow the instructions on the raffle copter. There are a few different things that you can do to enter. One of the mandatory ones is to leave a comment here on YouTube, and I do have a question in the raffle copter that you will need to answer that in your comment. And as I said, there are a few other ways that you can enter, but they are not mandatory, but they will get you extra points towards the giveaway. I think there's a total of 16 points possible, but even if you only do the mandatory one, you still are in for a chance to win. You do have 1 week to enter, and when the week is up, I will draw the winner and I will announce it here on YouTube. I haven't decided yet if I will be making a video to announce it or if I will just announce it in my community tab, but either way, I will announce it here on YouTube a few days after the giveaway closes. The winner will then have 3 days to contact me with their address, which I will pass on to Paper Smooches to send out the prize. If the winner does not contact me within those 3 days, then I will draw a new winner instead. And as I said, all the details for that are in the description box below, and all you need to do is go over to the raffle copter and follow the instructions there. So back to the card, whilst I was talking I did colour in the cat as well, which is very straightforward, and now I'm going to move on to colouring the fence, and I'm using red browns for this. And I started by laying down a base colour, kind of using the edge of my nib and making kind of streaky lines, and then I'm going with my mid-tone and then my darkest colour as well, adding in just sketchy lines to give the look of wood. And then I'll go back over the whole thing with my lightest colour just to blend it in a bit more and make it look more consistent in colour. And with that done, I'm going to move on to my background, which I started by sketching in some kind of bushes or trees with the lightest green, and then I'm going to colour those in with kind of C shapes and working just in layers of multiple shades of green. The further forward one is going to be a bit brighter than the ones it's overlapping, but also the ones in the background are going to kind of fade out. If you look at a long distance view, then things further away are slightly more faded. So I try to take that into consideration as I'm colouring the further back trees. So I did lay in a lighter colour as the base layer for those. My camera did die before I was able to do the last tree, so I had to leave that overnight and come back to it the next morning once it was fully charged. And I kind of lost the flow a bit and wasn't entirely sure how I'd done the technique of the front trees. I got myself a bit confused, but I did manage to get back to it eventually. It just took me a bit longer. I have skipped over showing how I coloured the sky because I decided I didn't like it, and I'm going to actually change it, and I'll show you how I did that in a little bit, so you can ignore that. And I'm going to draw back in my branch with those browns, and then here is where I fixed the sky. I cut it off completely, which was a bit scary because I'd spent so much time colouring in the image. I didn't want to ruin it, but I didn't like the sky, so I cut it away, and then I opened up the card and I used my cloud stencil again to add a sky to the design with Tumbled Glass Distress ink, which is a nice pale blue, so it doesn't actually show up a lot on camera, but it does give that subtle sky. I white heat embossed a sentiment onto my fence, used a grey to add the pupils to my little critter's eyes, and that completed my fourth card, which, whilst it is more complicated design than the other ones, it's actually not that different from the first one in a way, because it's pretty much just stamping and colouring. So that completes all 4 of my cards and the 4 different ways of using the Chubby Chums stamp set. I do hope you enjoyed this video and that you liked seeing the different techniques I used with the cards. Don't forget to check out the Rafflecopter link below and follow the instructions to be in with a chance to win the prize. And I'd love to see what you make with the Chubby Chums stamp set if you're the lucky winner. If you did like this video, please do press the like button to let me know, and you could perhaps leave a comment telling me if there's another stamp set that you'd like me to do a similar video with. If you're not yet subscribed to my channel, you can subscribe by pressing my logo that's showing on screen now. Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!